There are many parables in the Gospels, and the one we're going to reflect on here is the parable of the two sons, which you can find in the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 21, verses 28 to 32. Above all else, this parable demonstrates not just the words we give or the promise we make to others, but also the fact that our actions must reflect our words as well. So imagine for a minute the last time you said no to someone who asked for help. Let's just imagine this person really needed your help, but then you refused to help and said, "No, I'm sorry, I can't help you." Then afterwards, you felt really bad about it, and then you dwell in your mind thinking, that person needs help. Maybe I should be more charitable. If I don't help them, maybe they will struggle. And we keep reflecting and thinking in our minds. And then finally we change our mind and then call that person and says, "Okay, I'll help you out." Now, how many of us have been in this situation before? Yes? Yes. Of course, we do what's needed and then everybody's happy. And I'm sure it makes us happy as well. Now, imagine another time when you said yes to someone. You said you'd be there, you said you help them with whatever it is they need, but then you end up not doing it. How many of us have been guilty of that? I'm sure we can remember an example in our life that has happened to us. We feel guilty. All of us are guilty of that, maybe sometime or other. Maybe it's that one time we promised someone we'd take out the trash, but we didn't. Or maybe it was that one time we made an appointment with a friend for coffee, but then we forgot about it and we didn't go. Now, this happened too. So we can relate on both sides, right? Saying yes to somebody but not doing it, or saying no and then feeling bad and then doing it. Well, in the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 21, verses 28 to 32, Jesus asked the chief priests and elders of the people for an opinion. And of course, context always helps. Just prior to this, Jesus had a debate between the chief priests and the elders over the question of authority, specifically the authority of Jesus. Now, if you read the chapter 21 of the Gospel of Matthew, you can understand further the context of this parable. But we'll leave this point aside for another day. Here, I want to focus specifically on the parable of a man with two sons who asked them both to go work in his vineyard. Pay very close attention to how these two sons respond, not only in word, but also in their actions. So let's just quickly summarize what's going on here. You have Jesus asking the chief priests and the elders of the people a question. Imagine a man who has two sons. He asked the first son to go and work in a vineyard. The first son said, "No way, I'm not going to do it." But he felt bad about it, changed his mind, and went and worked in the vineyard. Then you have the other son, who he asked also to go work in the vineyard. Now this other son says, "Yes, sir," but he didn't do it. So which of the two did the Father's will? Now I think there's little debate about the answer here. In fact, the chief priests and the elders answered by saying the first. So they got the point right. So here in this reflection, I'd like to share three important points for us to consider. Point number one, both sons were asked to go and work in the vineyard, and both sons have the freedom to respond, not only in their words, but also in their action. Now, notice something here in this parable. Notice that the two sons both had the freedom to work or not work in the vineyard. The father did not force them to do it. So imagine you being the father in this story, for example. At the end, who would you think? Probably the first son, right? Who actually said no, felt bad about it, and then he went and worked in the vineyard. Now, perhaps you're familiar with the phrase, actions speak louder than words. It's good to say what you are going to do, but it's also much more important to actually do it. do what you say you're going to do. If someone, for example, tells you they're going to do something, but they don't do it, are you going to trust that person? That's the heart of the issue here. But there's still another deeper layer that is evident in this gospel reading, and this passage also alludes to it, which then brings us to point number 2. Notice who the two sons represent. So who do the two sons represent? The Gospels tell us the two sons represents two groups of people. The first represents the prostitutes and the sinners. Again, the Gospel passage make reference to this point. They initially rejected God in their actions, but they felt bad, repented, and did the will of the Father, just like the first son in the parable. In other passages, Jesus tells us he came not to call the righteous, but sinners. And so you see how this point aligns with the symbolism here. Now, shift to the second son. The second son represents the elders, the chief priests, those who claim in word of their faithfulness. But they are only faithful in their word, or in other words, in their appearance, what's on the outside. They are faithful, or some even say, well, they pretend to be faithful, but they are not faithful through their action. They say yes, but they actually don't do what they say. So consider this question further for spiritual reflection. Which is better, appearance of faithfulness or true faithfulness? Which then brings us to the third and final point I'd like to share and reflect in this parable in particular. And the third and final point is how this parable applies to our life. Now think about this for a minute. So practically speaking, how does this story apply in our own life? Imagine the following. We can have the appearance of being faithful to God. We can focus on the outside appearance and portray to everyone that we are good Christians, good disciples of Jesus Christ. Now, the appearance is one thing, but do we put what's on the outside, that is our appearance, into action? Do we put our faith into action? Because actions reinforces our faith. We can appear to be righteous, for example. We can appear to say we're Christian, but then if we go out and don't act in a Christian manner, don't live our life in conformity to how Jesus teaches us, then that's something for us to consider here. And this parable helps us to reflect precisely on that. I'm sure you've personally met people who appear to be faithful on the outside. In fact, they would declare in word that they are faithful. But for some of them, they live a double life. Darkness on the inside, anger, hatred. But then on the outside, they appear to be faithful. It's very important. Yes, on the outside, that is important for us to not only say yes, but then also to put it into practice. So then on a practical level, in our own daily living, there are many opportunities for us to do the will of the Father. That is, to do the will of God in our own ordinary daily life. Here's something very important to keep in mind. Notice the two sons. The first response that the son gives is not the last response. And let me say this again because it's so important. The first response of both sons is not their last response in a parable. Because yes, you can respond in word, but then it has to be demonstrated in action. The first son changed his mind after deliberating and wishing to do what's right. The second son seemingly says yes, but his words are completely hollow. His words were not backed up by any actions. In other words, if we are not living a good life now, our current response is not our last response. We can change. We can grow. We can do better. And that's what God wants from us. After thinking it through, we can be like the first son who should strive to do the will of the Father. So in this parable, it is clear that the first son did the will of the Father. So an important question for all of us to reflect on is this: which son or daughter are you? The first or the second? May God bless you.